Kansas City Chiefs, next team in line for our AFC West previews. And while this is another team that made a big offseason trade, for this team, the best player went the other direction, which is a very interesting change compared to the rest of the AFC West. So last year, of course, they still did make the AFC title game. They're 12-5, one of the best teams in football, one of the best offenses, and they still have Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. And there's not exactly much you can hope to start an NFL team with that's better than that. From that team, they do lose some players. Really only one that matters, Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill's, I think, clearly the second best receiver in football. Unbelievably useful. People, maybe now that he's not on the Chiefs, try to downplay him as just a deep threat or a bunch of this and that. But the truth is, the guy's elite. He's elite at every level. He wins in routes constantly. He's actually open. He can win jump balls even as a short guy. He's just really good, and you're going to notice a real big difference between him and the receivers that they brought in. No one else, whatever. Darrell Williams is a running back. Byron Pringle is fine as depth. Same with Demarcus Robinson, but not really missing a lot. Defensively, there are definitely names on those lists that are going to miss more. Travarius Ward is actually an outstanding corner. I understand with the money why they didn't keep him, but that still will hurt them. Jaron Reed did play well for this team last year. Tyrann Mathieu, of course, has been a positive player for forever. They also might have some addition from subtraction. Anthony Hitchens, Mike Hughes, kind of horrible players. Daniel Sorensen has real big faults. So we'll get into what they have this year, and that starts with what they bring in. Now, they bring in Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, two interesting receivers that we will talk about as we talk about its offense as a whole. They bring in Jerron Christian, a player I like a lot. We'll talk about more. Defensively, they did at least do a good job of replacing some talent here between Carlos Dunlap, Taylor Stallworth, and Justin Reed. They have actual starting-level players in some ways. This was the draft. Now, more so than years prior, outside of last year's offensive line, this team is going to be leaning on rookies in really important roles. That's not something they've necessarily experienced with, again, outside of last year's offensive line, where they happened to pick two of the best offensive linemen in football in the second and sixth rounds of the draft. Is that going to happen again? Statistics tell us almost overwhelmingly no, but it's not impossible, and they are different positions, so, we'll see. So this is the offense, right? And there's still a lot of talent on this side of the ball. We'll get the running game out of the way first. This team is actually going to be able to run the ball probably better even than they have been in the past. Andy Reid has always kind of struggled with the scheme with that. He had good years with LaShawn McCoy, and he's not bad overall, don't get me wrong. It's just not his strength as opposed to the newer offensive play callers like a Kyle Shanahan or something like that. It's a lot more straightforward, and it is a lot more dependent on the line getting push. It's built like this. They do have that. Orlando Brown, Joe Thuney, one of probably the best run-blocking side of a line that you're going to find in football, outside of maybe the 49ers or something like that. And then Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, two guys who I talked about going into last year were incredibly important for the Chiefs, but it was unlikely that they were going to step up and play well just because offensive line rookies in general just aren't that good off the bat the vast majority of the time. Well, these two proved that very, very, very wrong. Creed Humphrey might literally already be a top 5 center in football, and Trey Smith was really high up there on that guard list too. I don't know if he's quite top 5, but both of those players played incredibly well, and they dropped down in that draft for various reasons that I don't really want to get into here. But the point is, the Chiefs, they took advantage of that, and they have two outstanding players. The right tackle is the issue here. Lucas Niang, don't mind the typo there. He's good when he plays. He's injured to start the year, and he's missed a full year before, at least in his NFL career, and some time last year. That matters because while he is decent when he's on the field, who I presume would start in his place at right tackle as a backup is absolutely god-awful. Austin Wiley should not be playing on an NFL field. Maybe you can get away with him as a guard, but he's one of the offensive linemen that lost this team the Super Bowl a couple years ago and was a prime reason that Patrick Mahomes got the reputation he did as this gunslinger playmaker outside of the pocket when he was younger, because he had to deal with this horrible offensive line in front of no. Horrible. They went through a lot of injuries, but it ended up, end result was a pretty bad one. And Austin Wiley is a big part of that. They also brought back Austin Ryder, who's not on this list, who's another big part of that. Shouldn't be playing, though, so whatever. If this team is smart, they also brought in Jaron Christian, who I mentioned already. The guy can play. He's not really a plus as a run blocker, but as a pass protector, he's about as solid as you can hope for from a really inexpensive signing at tackle. And he's somebody who should have started games in Washington more than he did, or even on the Bears in last year. Jaron Christian can play, and he should absolutely be starting for tackle for this team. But, whatever. The point is, as a whole, this run-blocking offensive line is still really good because of how good the left side is. They spent all that money on Joe Thuney. He's worth every penny. And Orlando Brown, as a run blocker, he's that dude. More importantly, the passing game. How does this look without Tyreek Hill? Well, let's kind of break it down position by position. So, offense line-wise, and this is kind of really key to this, they're still really good. Their middle is just about as good as you're going to find between Tooney, Creed Humphrey, and Trey Smith, about as good as a pass-protecting interior as you're possibly going to find. And while Orlando Brown can struggle with like true speed rushers on the outside, it's not to this degree that really hurts the offense, and Patrick Mahomes is aware of that and can deal with that well, even as opposed to most quarterbacks. And on the right side, so yeah, maybe Austin Wiley does play and he does suck, but we've literally seen them last year still put out a really good offense with one big hole in the offensive line. So as long as it's just that, they'll still be able to deal with it. It's not good, especially once they get into the higher levels of AFC competition, but to start with, if that is the case, as I'm going to kind of assume it will be, just for, whatever loyalty the coaches like him, whatever, that is an issue. Then you have Patrick Mahomes. Tied might as well be for the best quarterback in football. I still think it's Aaron Rodgers, but the distinction isn't actually important. Patrick Mahomes is a guy who, no matter what happens on the offensive side of the football on a play-to-play basis, is going to generate positives for your offense, and a lot of them. While he isn't like amazing about sitting in a completely clean pocket and ripping apart a defense by finding the correct open guy, as opposed to like prime Tom Brady, he's still in the absolute elite tier of that compared to most NFL quarterbacks. And once he's on the move, making plays, even if it's not because he's flushed out of the pocket, just because he sees an opportunity, he is the best. He creates a ton of positive yards just with throwing the ball into positive areas down the field. He can make throws that nobody else can, and he does it with a level of consistency that is mind-blowing. That's why Patrick Mahomes is so good, is that he combines this ability outside of the pocket with being one of the best quarterbacks inside the pocket as well. And when you combine that with a good offensive line and still having Andy Reid as your as your head coach, you're going to do fine on offense. We do still have to talk about the receivers, though, and this is where this team has made a lot of mistakes. This receiver room is like one of the worst in football. There's names that people are going to recognize, but it's important to remember that those guys were all in situations that recognition was kind of handed to them as opposed to them earning it themselves. So Mikol Hardman, former second-round pick, the dude just can't play wide receiver. He's really fast in a straight line, and if you get in the ball in his hands in really specific scenarios, sure, he will make plays if he gets to run literally straight forward. He, however, has horrible hands. He's terribly unphysical and can get knocked off routes really easily. He doesn't actually shake people in the course of routes. He just doesn't get open unless it's completely generated for him. And while the Chiefs still do that, as shown by his production over the last 2 years, which is inconsistent because he's bad, but whatever. He will still do that this year. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, actually really, really similar player in outcomes. The way that it looks is a lot different. But they're really similar in that they kind of just win by running in a straight line down the field. Marquez Valdes-Scantling significantly slower, but he is bigger, more physical, and while he can't really track the ball very well to save his life most of the time, and was a cause of the Packers' offense not being nearly as good as it should have been in the past, he still will be on the field enough running those routes that eventually he will catch one of them just by happenstance, and it will look really good. Now, I don't hate either of those guys personally. Obviously, I have no idea. I don't know anything about them. But on the football field, both of them just actively hurt your offense. And again, that won't matter against a lot of teams because of how good the surrounding stuff is with the Chiefs. That will hurt them against the higher levels of the AFC. Juju Smith-Schuster, kind of in a similar boat. He's much better than the other two. His problem more lies in his skill set is more or less swapped with them. He also doesn't get open when he runs routes, and he doesn't beat people in man coverage at almost any time. But he kind of just is more bad and slow down the field, whereas in the middle, he at least is actually good after the catch, living up to that side of the reputation, and does have okay hands. And when this team is calling a lot of plays and creative ways to get him space regardless, he will take the ball and take advantage of that in a much more extreme way than those other two will. So while they are all limited in this offense with Patrick Mahomes, it's still going to create a bunch of positive outcomes, especially when, of course, they are flanking Travis Kelsey. Travis Kelsey is the truth, the best tight end in football with George Kittle, and he still is somebody that generates offense all by himself in a similar way to players like Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams do. Again, it looks a lot different, but the point is that he's constantly open. He's constantly making plays and yardage for your offense because of how good he is about moving around and connecting with Patrick Mahomes and finding space down the field. Travis Kelsey is awesome, and he's why this offense, again, is going to work really, really well still. They also have second-round pick Sky Moore. They bring in Justin Watson. We'll see. With Sky Moore, he's a rookie. I don't like to talk about how good or bad rookies are going to be because nobody knows, but theoretically he could be really important for this offense. And Justin Watson is actually just as good as Hardman and Marcus Valdes-Scantling, so he does provide a baseline of that below average level wide receiver play, which may not sound like a big up, but it's something, and it does help to have depth, especially compared to the rest of this team. At running back, running backs don't matter, whatever. Clyde Edwards-Helaire did look okay, especially last year compared to his rookie year. He did show some of the contact balance. I got him drafted that highly. Ronald Jones, he's fine. In this scheme, I actually think it helps because he won't have to work to get the ball as much. And when he does get the ball, he is at least dangerous. He can break big runs. He can break big tackles. I do think he will be useful for this team. But overall, as an offense, like I said, I can criticize receivers or the right tackle position as much as I want, but the truth is you have Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and a good offensive line, and that by itself generates a top 5, very likely offense in the NFL. One thing that is a theme with this team that I'm going to mention now, but even more so on the defense side of football, is they're unbelievably shallow at every position. All this stuff hinges on one or two players staying healthy. Travis Kelsey can't get hurt this year. Obviously Mahomes, but he's a quarterback. That's different. Travis Kelsey, if he gets hurt, then a lot of what they do offensively kind of goes in the tank, and then they have to rely so much more on these players to actually get open, and you will see that go downhill really quickly. I just want to mention that while we're still here. So then we get to the defense. Again, this defense does have a couple exceedingly talented players, but they, similar to this wide receiver position, have kind of made some mistakes in what they brought in, the way that they've arranged themselves around their superstar player, in this case it being Chris Jones. So let's talk about the defensive line first. As a run-stopping group, this is actually one of the best in football. Chris Jones, super elite, the best defensive tackle in football. That isn't Aaron Donald by a large margin. He's really, really good against the run, too. He makes plays, doesn't get moved. The dude's awesome. Derek Nottie showed a lot last year as a nose tackle, who actually created more penetration and made more plays in and around the line of scrimmage than I ever imagined he would. He was pretty good. Colin Saunders is a similar player to him, and while not as good, he's valuable. Tershawn Wharton proved that his 2 years ago wasn't a mistake. The dude he belongs on an NFL field. He gets in the backfield a little bit. They bring over Taylor Stallworth from the Colts, a player I actually do kind of like a lot, especially as a rotational third defensive tackle, like A+ on that. Frank Clark does play the run well. Mike Dana absolutely plays the run well. And they bring in Carlos Dunlap, who, despite, I think, his shortcomings as a pass rusher compared to what most people think of him, is absolutely a good, smart run defender who uses his body well. Also, I do need to mention they do have first-round pick George Karlaftis there. No clue if he's going to be good, but theoretically he does play an important role on this defense. So, as a pass rushing unit, here you run into more issues. They're entirely dependent on Chris Jones. Chris Jones, again, if you're going to depend on a player, is as good as you can ask for, but it's still really, really hard for one guy to generate the type of pass rush you need to win in the NFL defensively a lot. Frank Clark is a good secondary option, and I like him as somebody who does have a high motor most of the time and will take advantage of opportunities created by other players. It's what he's done a lot throughout his career. He doesn't really create them themselves, and it's not like he's amazing at that stuff I mentioned before, the way that like a Khalil Mack is or something like that. He's just pretty good at it. But other than those two, you just have nothing. Like I said, Carlos Dunlap, he is a fairly similar player actually in that he puts up sack numbers because he tries hard, and he does have some moves and will beat up on like bad tackles, but against actual good offensive lines, he's just not necessarily what you want. Maybe George Karlaftis is that guy, again, rookie, who knows. And none of these other defensive tackles that are besides Chris Jones are actually offering real pass rush from the interior. Wharton's fine, but not like a level that the defense is or the offense is concerned about. So then as a passing secondary or the rest of this team, I should talk about the linebackers, I suppose, next. Nick Bolton is really good. And I think he's only going to get better. He's a player who did show the athleticism and intelligence to consistently make plays being around the ball and not get sent 90 yards in the other direction by a simple play fake the way that a lot of young linebackers tend to be. Willie Gay also, I do think, as that secondary off-ball linebacker is fine. He's a little smaller than I would hope, and he doesn't like run fit amazingly. And he's not this like A+ in pass protection, pass coverage, but he is good enough, especially compared to what the Chiefs have thrown at linebacker for the last 4 years, that you can be happy with those two. They do also bring in Jermaine Carter. I think this team is going to have 2 linebackers on the field the vast majority of the time. If they go to 3, though, they are in trouble. Jermaine Carter's bad. He's one of these linebackers, actually very similar to Anthony Hitchens from the last few years, where if stuff is happening between the guards and it's a straightforward run play, cool, he can handle that. He will get in there, he will stick his nose in, he'll be strong and physical. If it is literally anything else, you are going to see him go the wrong direction, get just ran around, and not be able to cover anybody to save his life in the pass game, which is not great. But yeah, sorry. So move on from the linebackers. The secondary too, especially in pass coverage. If everyone stays healthy, they might be okay. Rashad Fenton, I think very highly of. L'Jarius Sneed, I also think very, very highly of. Both of those guys cover guys very consistently. I've been talking about how good Rashad Fenton is for many years and how he should have been starting for this team, which was proved last year when he was healthy. He, however, is hurt to start this year. And other than him, you are talking about rookie corner and nothing. Trey McDuffie might be good. I'm not going to rule that out. But he is a rookie corner, and we've seen a lot of those guys be pretty damn bad over the last few years. Now, some of them have been really good, too. Don't get me wrong. Maybe he is Patrick Surtain, or maybe he is, young Jalen Ramsey or whatever. It's a lot more likely, I would say, that he's more of a DeAndre Baker or something like that, who's somebody who didn't play nearly as well. We'll see what happens, but what's concerning is that they are leaning on him so much, and while there are other names in camp here, there was nobody I thought was even notable enough to really put on this depth chart because they all are either rookies or completely unproven guys who I would be terrified of throwing at any modern NFL offense. And that's going to be an issue for this team in general. You get to safety, and there they are better, and they do have more depth, but still they are lacking the high-end players. They bring in Justin Reed to replace Tyrann Mathieu. He's not a replacement. Justin Reed is fine. He can be a starter on a good defense, but he's not like a playmaker, really. He isn't this high. He's definitely not a high-end coverage player. He's just more of somebody who's going to safely play his zone or his deep responsibility decently, and while he can move up against the run, again, it's not somebody over the course of his season who's kind of constantly be making plays. And he doesn't have the coverage chops or brain that Tyrann Mathieu did as far as a guy who's coming forward to disrupt stuff in the middle of the field, and that's concerning. Juan Thornhill is actually a fairly similar player in that he's just more or less a deep, responsible, safe safety who's decent but nothing better. Brian Cook is a high second-round pick. We'll see. Rookie. They also bring over Lonnie Johnson. I specifically put him at safety, not corner, because I just needed to remind or tell Chiefs fans. If he's your corner depth, you're screwed. He cannot play corner in the NFL. He sucks. He's so slow laterally. He gets beat by every type of reasonable receiver in the NFL. It's really, really bad. At safety, I actually think he's okay when he's not being asked to do that type of stuff, when it's more like covering tight ends or playing, more zones. I actually think he's decent then, and he can be more of a playmaker maybe than anybody we've talked about before up to this point. But on their site, he's listed as a corner. I want to speak that out of existence, so that's why I put him there. But overall, yeah, this defense, the number one thing is you need Chris Jones, and if you don't, then you're kind of screwed because there's nobody else on this defense that is making an offense do something they don't want to do. And that's really a problem in the modern NFL. Nobody is disruptive, talented, or consistently good enough to cause the offense to have to play around them if it's not Chris Jones. And while when he's out there, he is at least something, he's still just one player. And they're depending on guys like Trent McDuffie or Justin Reed to be or even Nick Bolton, who I do like, who I think is the only other player on this defense that has a chance to be a guy that I talked about like that. They're depending on them to do that, and that's horrifying. And that's not even to say, that's not like their second stringers they're hoping step up. These are guys that are pinned in starters right now. This defense could go really downhill really, really quickly and be reminiscent of the Chiefs teams from when Patrick Mahomes very first took over. That is to say, those teams still made and or won the Super Bowl. Which is something that you need to remind yourself when you talk about this team. They could still be really, really, really good by virtue of how good Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are combined with their offensive line. Schematically, though, I also will say that they run into a lot of tough stuff, too. They're offensively still going to be concerned about teams that are able to play smart, disciplined zones and keep stuff in front of them. That's been Mahomes' kryptonite his whole career. Comparing his weaknesses to other quarterbacks isn't fair. He still scores 25 points on his weak teams, whereas other quarterbacks score 0. That's kind of an important distinction. But the Chargers, the Colts, the Raiders, the Bills, the 49ers, all teams that play the exact size type of defense that I fear limits this Chiefs' offensive ceiling. And like I said, defensively, I think they don't match up well with really any teams that aren't already bad at offense. And if they suffer injuries, they could get really bad really quickly, the defense could. So this actually, I would say, is probably the worst roster in the AFC West pretty comfortably. At this point, maybe with the Raiders are fairly similar. And while they do have the advantage of the quarterback coach stuff, the defense might be bad enough that this is the first time we see the Chiefs win less than double-digit games since Patrick Mahomes started over. Now, that means they win 9 games instead of 12, right? This team will never be bad with him at quarterback. But this is not the year that I'd be super excited about the Chiefs repeating the way that they have been as opposed to before.